As the first hint of dawn touched the sky over Sycamore Hollow, Missouri, a small, unassuming figure emerged. A 9-year-old girl, clad in oversized rubber boots, was seen pushing a weathered green wheelbarrow along the dusty shoulder of County Road 12. She wasn't on her way to school, nor was she engaged in any childish games. Instead, she made deliberate stops at each property lining the rural route, meticulously examining the areas behind barns and along fence lines. Her purpose was to gather items that most residents of the valley had long since discarded. Her initial destination was the Garner farm. Against a fence post at the edge of a field sat a slumped compost pile, declared beyond salvation by Danny Garner back in September. He deemed it too sodden, its decay proceeding incorrectly, and had unceremoniously dumped it there simply to clear his land. The girl, Wren Calloway, knelt beside the pile, scooped a portion into her hand, brought it to her nose, and offered a subtle nod of approval. With careful, measured scoops, she began transferring the material into her wheelbarrow. Danny Garner observed this peculiar activity from his kitchen window, calling his wife to witness the scene. After a brief, bewildered chuckle, she returned to her cooking. Danny, amused, soon found himself on the phone with his neighbor, eager to share the peculiar tale. By mid-morning, the story of the young girl with her wheelbarrow full of what everyone considered spoiled compost had spread throughout Sycamore Hollow, carried along by the infectious laughter that often accompanies local anecdotes. By the time Wren reached the Calloway family farm, her own homestead, the wheelbarrow was laden with a dark, heavy cargo. Her boots were caked with mud up to her knees, and her face bore the concentrated expression of someone privy to an understanding, yet inaccessible to those around her. Her father, Dale Calloway, watched her trundle past the barn. He glanced at the overflowing wheelbarrow, then at his daughter, before retreating indoors for his morning coffee. No one, not her parents, nor her neighbors, nor even Wren herself, could articulate the full scope of her endeavor at that moment. Yet she had perceived something that the adults had ceased to notice. The Calloway farm, nestled in a gentle valley where the Ozark foothills transitioned into broad expanses of farmland, had been in the family for 4 generations. Its 60 acres were dedicated to row crops, a rotation of corn and soybeans. Dale Calloway mirrored his father's work ethic: early mornings, few words, and hands perpetually marked by the soil. His wife, Patrice, cultivated a small but productive kitchen garden, a testament to her knack for coaxing a respectable harvest from ground that yielded less and less to the larger fields. Patrice possessed a keen eye for detail, a trait inherited by her daughter. Wren, at 9, was not a child prodigy but a quiet observer, her determination a stubborn refusal to accept simple explanations. To comprehend her pre-dawn mission with the wheelbarrow on that October morning, one must rewind to the summer preceding it. A subtle yet significant change had taken place in the land surrounding Sycamore Hollow. Dale had witnessed a steady decline in his crop yields for 3 consecutive seasons. His corn production fell nearly 18 bushels per acre below the county average, and his soybeans exhibited poor nodulation, indicating an inability to fix nitrogen effectively. Despite increased fertilizer application, the yields remained stubbornly low. In August, Sandra Pruitt, the county extension agent, visited the farm. She examined the rows, knelt to the earth, and pressed soil into her palm. "Compaction here," she observed softly, "and here. Dale, your organic matter is deficient. Years of intensive tillage and synthetic inputs have depleted the beneficial microbial life. The soil structure is deteriorating. Rain runs off rather than penetrating." Dale's question, "So what do I do?" was met with Sandra's counsel. "You can continue to feed the crop, or you can begin to nourish the soil. They are not the same." Dale acknowledged her advice, but revitalizing the soil was a gradual process, and financial obligations were dictated by a fixed schedule. A few weeks before that fateful October morning, Wren, exploring behind her grandfather's barn, encountered something that sparked her curiosity. Earl Calloway, Dale's father, a retired farmer living in a cottage on the property, had maintained a compost pile for decades. Coffee grounds, eggshells, vegetable scraps, dried leaves, and grass clippings were regularly turned. The material at the bottom, when fully decomposed, was dark, crumbly, and possessed a sweet, earthy aroma. Earl affectionately referred to it as his black gold. While observing earthworms in a finished section, Wren noticed a distinct difference. Her grandfather's compost teemed with life. Earthworms threaded through the dark mass, and delicate white fungal filaments formed an intricate network, suggesting an unseen subterranean construction. "Grandpa," she inquired, "what makes compost good or bad?" Earl, seated on an overturned feed bucket, explained, "Browns and greens, carbon and nitrogen. Dry leaves and straw provide your carbon. Kitchen scraps and fresh clippings offer nitrogen. Too much nitrogen causes it to turn sour. Too much carbon results in stagnation, simply drying out. And it requires aeration. Turn it. Let it breathe." When asked about the consequence of improper composting, Earl stated, "People give up on it. They dump it somewhere and consider it a total loss." That afternoon, Wren cycled through the hollow, her gaze sweeping over every farm. Everywhere she looked, she saw neglected compost piles, left too wet, never turned, never finished, materials that had been abandoned. She devoted 2 evenings to the county library, borrowing books from Sandra Pruitt. The extension agent was quietly pleased by the 9-year-old's inquiries into soil biology. Wren delved into topics like carbon-to-nitrogen ratios, thermophilic bacteria capable of heating compost piles to over 130 degrees Fahrenheit to eliminate pathogens, and the process of humus formation. She learned how finished compost binds soil particles into aggregates that simultaneously retain air and moisture, and about mycorrhizal fungi, the underground networks that extend plant root systems and facilitate nutrient exchange. Armed with this knowledge, she ventured out with her wheelbarrow. Her initial attempt, however, proved unsuccessful. Wren applied the collected material to a small test plot near the kitchen garden and planted spinach seedlings. Within days, the seedlings yellowed and withered. The compost she'd gathered was only partially decomposed, actively releasing heat and ammonia that scorched the delicate roots before they could establish. She returned to Earl and the library, learning that immature compost competes with plants for nitrogen and damages roots, akin to raw fertilizer. The compost had to reach full maturity. She painstakingly rebuilt the collected material into new windrows behind the barn, layering damp chicken manure with dry autumn leaves gathered from roadside ditches. To kickstart the microbial activity, she added a bucket of finished compost from Earl's pile. She then thoroughly watered the mixture until it resembled a wrung-out sponge. Using an old meat thermometer from the kitchen drawer, she monitored the temperature. On the 3rd day, the core reached 128 degrees Fahrenheit. She turned the pile. By the 6th day, the temperature climbed to 141 degrees, indicating successful microbial action. The neighbors began to notice the windrows near the fence line. Danny Garner inquired of Dale what his daughter was doing with a pitchfork in November. Dale admitted he was still trying to figure it out himself. News spread through the hollow, as it always does in close-knit communities, not with malice, but with a shared, gentle amusement reserved for the peculiar, yet seemingly harmless. A young girl collecting everyone's discarded compost during the frigid weather. Everyone chuckled, yet not one person paused to ask her why. By February, the windrows had undergone a remarkable transformation. What had once been dark, pungent, and partially decayed material was now uniform and crumbly, exuding the scent of fertile earth, reminiscent of a forest floor after rainfall. Wren dug into the base of the pile and discovered it laced with white mycelium, visible fungal colonies that had migrated from the surrounding soil. Earthworms had also taken up residence in the lower layers. In late February, she applied the finished compost to her test plot. 3 inches were gently worked into the surface, and she patiently awaited the end of the last frost. In April, she planted tomatoes, beans, and 2 short rows of corn, using the identical seed packets as Dale's main planting. By June, the difference was undeniable to anyone who bothered to look. The plants in Wren's plot boasted a shade of green so profound it appeared almost blue. When she carefully excavated the soil alongside a tomato plant, exposing the roots, a suggestion from Earl, she discovered a dense, white network reaching out in every direction. Sandra Pruitt arrived in early July. She knelt beside the plot, her gaze fixed on the vibrant plants for a long moment, her silence speaking volumes. Then she looked up at Dale. "The finished compost has improved soil aggregation," she stated. "Better pore structure, enhanced water retention. The microbial activity has slowly released nutrients in forms that the roots can readily absorb." She paused. "The roots went searching, and they found something worth discovering." Late July in Sycamore Hollow typically brought modest expectations for the harvest. Not so on Wren's test plot. The tomatoes were abundant and firm, the bean vines laden with dense pods. The 2 short rows of corn, from the same seed stock as Dale's main field, yielded ears that Sandra measured at nearly 28% above the field average in both weight and kernel density. Danny Garner, crossing the fence to observe, stood at the edge of the small plot for an extended period. "What did she actually do?" he asked Dale. Dale considered for a moment. "She fed the soil," he replied. "Not the plant, the soil." By afternoon, other neighbors had also made their way to the fence line. The same individuals who had openly mocked her windrows in November now stood quietly at the edge of the 10-foot plot, hands in their pockets, shaking their heads, not in dismissal, but in genuine awe. Masanobu Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer and philosopher who dedicated his life to studying nature's processes without intervention, once wrote that the ultimate aim of farming is not merely the cultivation of crops, but the development and refinement of human beings. Wren Calloway had not read Fukuoka, but that summer, standing at the edge of a small test plot in her grandfather's worn rubber boots, she had arrived at that same profound understanding through a different path. By August, 3 neighboring farms had requested Wren's guidance in assessing their fields and soil. Now 10 years old, she carried a spiral notebook she had begun in March. She spoke of carbon ratios and microbial inoculation with the ease of someone who had learned as much from failure as from study. Sandra Pruitt invited her to present at the County Extension Fall meeting. Earl sat in the front row, his silence conveying a depth of pride that needed no translation. Denny Garner stopped Dale at the mailbox one afternoon. "I thought she was collecting garbage," he remarked. Dale offered a faint smile. "She was," he confirmed. "She just knew it wasn't garbage anymore." The true harvest that summer was never about the tomatoes or the corn. It was the patient, persistent, and quietly earned proof that what is discarded is seldom worthless. It was the realization that the soil beneath our feet is not a mere surface to be exploited, but a living system to be nurtured. It was the understanding that the most potent tools a farmer can wield are free: curiosity, keen observation, and the willingness to examine closely what everyone else has overlooked. Waste transforms into value in the hands of those who can see its potential, and the greatest harvest always begins far below the surface. What insight resonated with you from Wren's story? share it in the comments, and let us know where you are watching from. These narratives remind us that wisdom travels subtly and finds those prepared to receive it. If you appreciate stories like this, subscribe and join our community. We'll see you in the next installment.